Dr. Madyarov. We are pleased to present our project, a case study of EFL learners' experiences of using interactive fiction with ChatGPT. Our study was grounded in sociocultural theory. First, we will introduce our study and its rationale. Then we will talk about theoretical and conceptual framework. Later, we will present research question, methodology, findings, limitations, pedagogical implications, suggestions for future research. And finally, we will conclude and open the floor for questions and comments. So Dr. Madyarov will introduce the study.
Thank you, Emma. Hi, everyone, again. So just to give you the context also a little bit, this was a thesis project for Emma, and I was the advisor. And so the study was framed, as Emma mentioned, within the sociocultural theory, within which language learning happens within the socially mediated and meaningful communication. It was Emma's interest to use narrative approach to teaching English. And so we adopted interactive fiction within which learners can participate in co-production of the story at different points of branching points. When the story develops, learners can choose to go one way or another. And so the context where this happened, the space, was ChatGPT. ChatGPT unfolded the story, offered the branching points for the learner, different points in time during the lesson. But we also wanted to know whether ChatGPT is able to act as a more knowledgeable other according to sociocultural theory, and as such be able to mediate the learning, the language acquisition, according to sociocultural theory, through prompt engineering, obviously. And so therefore the problem from here was that we didn't know whether this would be possible with ChatGPT through prompt engineering, and specifically within the focus of on speaking and writing activities in an EFL class.
So our study was grounded in sociocultural theory, as mentioned, where human development happens through interaction and mediation. Language itself functions as a mediating tool, but so do the stories, technology, which shape cognition and development. Mediating tools include cognitive linguistic, metacognitive, affective, and regulatory support within zone of proximal development. Zone of proximal development is the distance what learners can do independently and what can they achieve with the help of more knowledgeable other. Effective mediation is not static, however, it's contingent and graduated in enabling learners to go from auto-regulation to self-regulation. And this is key indicator of development in sociocultural theory. Applying these ideas to our study, interactive fiction can function as a mediating cultural artifact that organizes interaction and meaning making. And in turn, ChatGPT can also scaffolding interaction, provide feedback, acting as a mediating tool and more knowledgeable other when pedagogically regulated. However, research also highlighted some challenges that this task can function effectively if we have careful task design and pedagogical regulations. This led us to explore the following research question: how does ChatGPT mediate EFL learners' lexicogrammatical development for speaking and writing tasks in interactive fiction? To explore these questions, we applied qualitative case study grounded in sociocultural theory. Classes conducted within one-on-one tutoring context. Regarding positionality, researcher was partially insider, meaning that researcher was teacher and the relative of one of the participants. And recognizing the potential for bias, several steps were taken to reduce bias. For example, pseudonyms were chosen for participants. Also, the data were triangulated. Three participants took place in the study. Sue was 20 years old, Armenian, having B1 proficiency level. Alex was Russian student, 20 years old, having B2 proficiency level, and Annie was 14 years old, Armenian, having B1 plus proficiency level. To collect the data, four research instruments were applied: ChatGPT logs, semi-structured interviews, class audio recordings, and teacher-researcher notes. The overall study lasted 4 weeks, and classes took place twice per week, lasting from 20 to 50 minutes. Maximum variation sampling was chosen to capture differences in age, first language, proficiency levels, and gender differences. Data were analyzed through color coding, pattern identification, and triangulation. Core researcher reviewed the study for credibility, and also these identified patterns for data for findings were guided by sociocultural theory concepts. To start the research, parental consent and oral assent were obtained from participants. Also, data were stored securely and will be destroyed after publication or presentation. To speak about ChatGPT-based interactive fiction tasks, I would say that we designed interactive fiction tasks to approximate sociocultural theory principles, mediation, scaffolding, and movement from auto-regulation to self-regulations. Task followed a branching narrative structure with 6 scenes altering between speaking and writing. Tasks prompts were redesigned after each lesson to align the learning experiences within sociocultural theory framework and also based on the learner's needs. Here you will see sample prompt for ChatGPT. However, the font is small, is made intentionally small to give you a high-level snapshot of about the structure of the prompt and what learners experience. Here you can see that interactive fiction template for ChatGPT had the role, system rules for ChatGPT, having including interactive story structure, task integration, task progression, feedback rules, also vocabulary focus and pedagogical requirements. Here you can see what learners went through. Overall, they had 6 scenes. They received the story, also branching options, option A, B, for the learners to choose how to continue the story. Also, the learners had to speak, record their voices, or write their answers using the target vocabulary mentioned in the prompt. Here you can see the interaction, and in the end, ChatGPT also provided feedback for language use. So speaking about findings, I'll say that one major finding is that story acted as a mediating tool itself. Story functioned as the object of the activity, guiding learners' attention and goals. Learners produced more and richer output when they were emotionally engaged, and narrative context mediated engagement, imagination, and meaning making. For example, one of the participants mentioned in interview that she was really interested in the task and she felt she was really at work. The next finding refers to vocabulary mediation. Target vocabulary was noticed, recycled, and reused across the scenes. Vocabulary use here became more intentional, not mechanical, and interactive fiction with ChatGPT acted as a more knowledgeable other for lexical mediation. For example, in this class, vocabulary list was mentioned for ChatGPT here, and the student used in his output 2 of the given list: frightening and exhausted. Next finding refers to reflective questions as metacognitive mediation. Reflective questions encourage learners to justify their choices, evaluate their outcomes, and also monitor their language use, supporting awareness, planning, and self-regulation within their zone of proximal development. It's important to mention here that reflective questions were more effective when they were presented separately, not embedded within task instruction and branching options of the story, and separating reflective questions from task performance reduced cognitive load and allowed learners to focus first on meaning making, story creation, and then after that reflecting. Next finding refers to affective mediation. Emotional safety supported participation and engagement. ChatGPT kept praising and also lowering the effective filter. However, not all the affective mediation was successful because one of the students, Alex, sometimes ignored praise and he prioritized the continuation of the story, because here you see that ChatGPT kept suggesting generating verbal feedback, which didn't make sense probably for the learner. So he sometimes kept reading these comments, and he was more focused on continuing the story. Speaking about feedback, earlier classes, language-related feedback was immediate and interrupted communication flow. Language-related feedback was top-down, without gradual movement from auto-regulation to self-regulation within the learner's zone of proximal development. Here, the example demonstrates that students received corrective feedback after each output, which interrupted communication flow, and they didn't enjoy such kind of feedback too much, though they produced more accurate speeches scene by scene. For later classes, after prompt redesign, feedback became more selective to avoid communication flow, and the feedback became more sociocultural theory aligned and encouraged learners self-regulation and internalization of forms. For example, ChatGPT, in the prompt for feedback, I added the questions, how to elicit, how to ask the student questions to lead them find out the correct forms and correct themselves, and go through auto regulation to self-regulation, internalizing the correct forms. To sum up, interactive fiction can mediate learning as a cultural artifact. Mediation depended on sociocultural theory aligned ChatGPT prompt design. Learners went through auto regulation to self-regulation over time, and learners became more autonomous. They became more confident, produced longer, richer output, and more coherent. They produced more coherent language over time. So Dr. Irshad Madyarov will continue and present limitations, pedagogical implications, and suggestions for future research.
So from among the limitations, these three could be highlighted. AI as mediator, you could see here that ChatGPT did not really act independently. So we had to, Emma had to prompt engineer and tweak over time. It improved how it mediated. Might not necessarily be considered as research methodological limitation, but during the study, it affected as well how students interacted. The other two are more methodological limitations, the developmental scope, that the study took place over 4 weeks, and should have mentioned these were one-on-one classes also, so tutoring classes in a way, and this communication with ChatGPT also happened in the presence of the teacher, who was also the researcher, Emma. And so we thought that 4 weeks were not sufficient to really understand how internalization happened across listening, speaking, and of course, we're focusing on vocabulary and grammar within those skills. And so that we would like to highlight as one of the limitations. Effective mediation, because a lot of effective mediation among human interactors happen through visual input as well. And so obviously at this point, ChatGPT could not see the face, could not read the emotions. So that was something that we thought was a limitation as well. So for pedagogical implications, Emma mentioned some of them already that when she presented. In the interest of time, I'll just highlight a few of these. So choosing the storylines, and perhaps your questions, if you're curious, you can ask Emma about the storylines, but picking the realistic storylines embedded into the, related to the interests of the learners is important, we thought. Obviously, if we believe that sociocultural theory gives us the proper understanding of how learning happens, then it's important to align the prompts such that GPT or any other AI system is able to approximate that communication to regulate, to that the regulation moves from out to self-regulation through this zone of proximal development. So that, and maybe maybe that's good enough given again the interest of time, in the interest of time. And one last slide here for the future research. We haven't mentioned here that some focus was on grammar and vocabulary, and yet it was very like embedded in the conversation. It wasn't very concrete focus on how, for example, grammar was developed. And we thought it'd be interesting. There was some data that we saw that there was a lot of interesting potential for teaching grammar, and that could be explored more. Effective mediation, as we mentioned, especially praise. ChatGPT can be very annoying with that. So yeah, I guess what else can we highlight? I'm a little rushed here because we're over time.
You have 2 minutes.
And maybe we could, but we would like to leave this time for the questions, yeah? So yeah, and also, the last one I could highlight that. So we use sociocultural theory here, and the previous presentation also was interesting in that they use several theoretical frameworks, and might be interesting to explore how ChatGPT, for example, fares when it comes to other theories, such as cognitive load theory. It can be overwhelming sometimes when you interact with it, especially a language learner, and the pace can be very fast. And so different other frameworks might be useful, more enlightening for some questions.
All right, thank you so much for sharing your case study results. Open up to some